X's 6-year-old son is being used to print millions of dollars while getting overworked at meet and greets, and he's visibly tired of it. The kid just wants to live like a normal child, but his mother has turned him into a walking ATM machine. Today, we're going to expose the dark truth behind what's really happening to Gekyume Onfroy, and trust me, even X's own fans are saying he'd be furious if he was still here to see this. Now, before we dive into this whole situation, let me give you some context on who XXXtentacion was and how his son came into this world, because understanding X's story is crucial to understanding why what's happening now is so messed up. XXXtentacion, whose real name was Jose Dwayne Ricardo Onfroy, was one of the most influential artists of his generation. He connected with millions of fans on a deep emotional level, helping people through depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts. His music was raw, vulnerable, and honest in a way that most mainstream artists weren't willing to be. But his life was cut tragically short, and he never got to meet the son he was so excited about. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through X's relationship with his baby mother Genesis Sanchez, how he came up with his son's unique name, the tragic circumstances of his death, and how his son went from being a beloved symbol of X's legacy to being exploited at expensive meet and greets where he's clearly uncomfortable. You'll see exactly what I mean as we go through all the evidence, and by the end, you'll understand why fans are genuinely concerned about this kid's well-being. So let's start with how this whole story began. XXXtentacion started dating Genesis Sanchez in January 2018. Now, if you're unaware, Genesis was a 20-year-old from Tampa who moved to Parkland, Florida in February 2018 just to be closer to X. In an interview with Local 10 News, Genesis described their relationship as pretty low-key and private. She said, and I quote, "Me and Jose are hermit crabs. We didn't really like to go out and stuff like that. We spent a lot of time at home, spent a lot of time playing video games. We didn't care to go out, especially even if we went out, people were noticing him and me." They were the type of couple that would go grocery shopping at midnight just to avoid crowds and attention. X already had a massive following at this point, and he valued his privacy, especially when it came to his personal relationships. This makes sense when you consider all the controversy and legal issues he was dealing with at the time, but we'll get to that later. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Genesis took a pregnancy test and found out she was pregnant. But getting in touch with X to tell him the news, that was apparently a whole mission. In her own words, she said, "Jose had like 30 phones. It was so ridiculous. So I'm like sending the picture to all these phones because I couldn't get a hold of him." Can you imagine? 30 phones. That's actually insane when you think about it, but it shows you the level of paranoia and security X was operating with. She kept sending the pregnancy test picture to phone after phone trying to reach him. Turns out he was at the gym training, but when she finally got through to him, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. She said, "Finally, when I got a hold of Jose, he was super excited. Like he was like, 'No way, family.'" You can tell from that reaction that X genuinely wanted this. He was ready to be a father, ready to start a family, and ready to bring a child into the world. Now let me explain something that's really important to understanding X's mindset and how much thought he put into his unborn child. X didn't just pick a random name out of a baby book. He literally invented a word specifically for his son. The name Gekyume isn't something you'll find in any dictionary or name registry, because XXXtentacion created it himself. According to Genesis, X knew about the pregnancy just 2 weeks before he died, and in that short time, he had already picked out names for both a boy and a girl. For a boy, he chose Gekyume. For a girl, he chose Giora. Both names were completely original creations that came from X's mind. So where did Gekyume come from? X publicly explained the meaning during his lifetime. He defined it as meaning a different state or next universe of thought. Some sources also describe it as meaning a higher state of being. X used this term in his notebooks, in conversations with friends, and in his creative concepts. It wasn't just a random word he made up on the spot. It was a philosophical concept that meant something deep to him. In an interview, Genesis explained the origin story. Gekyume means different state or next universe of thought, and Jose did pick out this name before he passed away. She went on to explain that X took a couple of letters from different characters from his favorite video game, Kingdom Hearts, and mashed them all together to create something entirely new. That's actually pretty creative when you think about it. He took elements from something he loved and transformed them into a name that represented his philosophy about consciousness and existence. Genesis also mentioned that people have trouble pronouncing it. She said, "I know it's kind of hard to say, Gekyume. If I hear people like DQ mean or gay, then I'm like, no, it's Gekyume." The correct pronunciation is Gekyume, by the way, in case you were wondering. But here's what really matters. X put genuine thought and meaning into his son's name. He wanted his child to represent something bigger, a new way of thinking, a higher consciousness, a different state of being. This wasn't just about having a cool, unique name. It was about giving his son an identity that carried philosophical weight and meaning. X was clearly excited about fatherhood and had big plans for what he wanted to teach his son and what he wanted his son to represent. But then everything changed on June 18, 2018. XXXtentacion was leaving Riva Motorsports, a motorcycle dealership in Deerfield Beach, Florida, when he was ambushed in what appeared to be a robbery. Two armed men approached his vehicle, a black BMW i8, and shot him multiple times. He was rushed to the hospital but was pronounced dead shortly after. He was only 20 years old. The whole situation was absolutely tragic and senseless. Here was a young man who had just found out he was going to be a father, who was excited about starting a family, who was working on his music and trying to turn his life around, and it was all taken away in an instant. The news sent shockwaves through the music industry and devastated millions of fans worldwide. 4 men were eventually arrested and charged in connection with his murder: Michael Boatwright, Dedrick Williams, Trayvon Newsom, and Robert Allen. The case alleged that they had planned to rob X after seeing him at the motorcycle shop with a Louis Vuitton bag containing $50,000 in cash. It was a premeditated robbery that turned into murder, and it cut short the life of one of the most promising and controversial artists of his generation. At the time of his death, X was facing charges of domestic violence from a former girlfriend who alleged that he had beaten her. These charges were serious and controversial, and they divided public opinion about X. However, after his death, his lawyers were able to get the charges dropped. I'm not here to debate whether X was guilty or innocent of those allegations. That's a whole separate conversation. What matters for this video is understanding the timeline and the circumstances surrounding his son's birth. X died on June 18, 2018. His son, Gekyume, was born on January 26, 2019. That's more than 7 months after X's death. Jase never got to meet his son. He never got to hold him, never got to teach him, never got to watch him grow up. The baby he was so excited about, the child he had carefully chosen a meaningful name for, came into the world without his father. Genesis had originally planned to have a home birth. She had a midwife ready and everything set up at the Parkland townhouse she was living in, which was owned by X's mother, Cleopatra Bernard. But after 26 hours of labor, things weren't progressing safely, and doctors made the decision to perform an emergency C-section. Genesis described the scene. "We had a very great support system with me. I had Cleo, I had my mom, and then the whole entourage of people who probably thought we were insane. We had like 7 cars just pull up to the hospital." She gave birth at Boca West Hospital, and Gekyume Onfroy entered the world. Throughout the pregnancy, X's mother Cleo had been posting pictures of Genesis's pregnant stomach on Instagram, but she kept Genesis's identity a secret because of the intense media interest surrounding who the mother was. Genesis herself said, "It is a little strange, especially since I've been so closed off for a very long time." She had been in hiding for 9 months, her identity kept under wraps, living in Cleo's townhouse away from public attention. But once Gekyume was born, he was immediately thrust into the spotlight. And honestly, how could he not be? This was XXXtentacion's son, the child of an artist who had touched millions of lives. X's fans had been devastated by his death, and many of them saw Gekyume as a living piece of X's legacy, a continuation of his bloodline and his spirit. From day one, Gekyume was a star. Fans loved him instantly. Every picture that was posted of him got millions of likes and comments. People would say things like, "He looks just like X," or "Protect this baby at all costs," or "X is watching over him from heaven." The love was genuine and overwhelming, and here's the thing. X had helped so many of his fans get through incredibly hard times. His music addressed depression, suicidal thoughts, anxiety, heartbreak, and trauma in a raw and honest way that resonated with people who felt alone in their struggles. When X died, those fans lost someone who felt like a friend, like someone who understood them. So when his son was born, those same fans naturally extended that love to Gekyume. He represented hope, continuation, and a piece of X that was still alive in this world. Genesis made it clear in interviews that she planned to make sure Gekyume knew about his father. She said, "I'm definitely going to make sure, like I'm not going to ever lie to him, that's for sure." He's gonna know about his dad. He's gonna hear about his dad 24/7. I'm gonna tell him about all the fun memories that I have with his dad. I'm gonna tell him how much he would have loved him. I know sometimes, probably when he gets older, it'll probably affect him more than when he is younger, but he's definitely gonna know about his father. That's actually really beautiful and important. Every child deserves to know about their parent, especially when that parent is no longer here. And at this point in the story, everything seemed like it was going in the right direction. Genesis seemed committed to honoring X's memory and raising their son with knowledge of who his father was. Now, let's talk about the financial side of things, because this is where the story starts to shift. When X died, his music was at the peak of its popularity. His album had debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200 just a few months before his death. Songs like Sad, Moonlight, and Changes were getting hundreds of millions of streams. After his death, those numbers exploded even more. It's a sad reality of the music industry, but artists often see a massive spike in streams and sales after they die. Fans want to revisit their music. New listeners want to understand what the hype was about, and there's a general cultural moment around the artist's legacy. X was no exception to this pattern. So in the years immediately following X's death, the royalties from his music were substantial. Streaming numbers were through the roof, his albums were selling, and posthumous releases were being planned. X's estate, which would include his mother Cleo and his son Gekyume, was receiving significant income from these royalties. But here's where it gets complicated, and this is something a lot of people don't understand about the music industry. Artists don't keep all the money from their music, not even close. X was signed to Empire Distribution and Caroline Records, and like most record deals, the label takes a significant cut of the royalties. Depending on the specific terms of X's contract, which we don't have full access to, the label could be taking anywhere from 50 to 80% of the streaming revenue. This is standard practice in the industry, but it means that even when an artist is generating millions of streams, the actual money going to the artist or their estate is a fraction of what you might expect. Labels justify this by pointing to the costs of marketing, distribution, production, and the initial advance they gave the artist. But the reality is that most artists, even successful ones, don't make as much from streaming as people think. Now it's been 7 years since X passed away. We're in 2026 now, and X died in 2018. And here's the harsh truth. Streaming numbers naturally decline over time. When an artist first dies, there's a surge of interest. But as years go by, new artists emerge, trends change, and the general public moves on. X still has a dedicated fan base, don't get me wrong, but he's not pulling the same streaming numbers he was in 2018, 2019, or even 2020. The posthumous albums that were released, Skins in 2018 and Bad Vibes Forever in 2019, did well commercially, but they also exhausted a lot of the unreleased material X had in the vault. There's only so much content you can release before you run out, and fans can tell when labels are scraping the bottom of the barrel with unfinished demos and songs that the artist never intended to release. So what does this mean for Genesis and Gekyume? It means the money started slowing down. The royalty checks that were coming in regularly started getting smaller. The streaming revenue that had been substantial started declining. And if Genesis had gotten comfortable living with high expenses, relying on X's music royalties to maintain a certain lifestyle, she would have started feeling the financial pressure. Now, I want to be clear. I don't know Genesis's exact financial situation. I don't have access to her bank statements or know what kind of expenses she has. But based on what we can observe from the outside, it seems pretty obvious that something changed, because what happened next is where this whole situation gets really problematic. At some point, Genesis made the decision to start doing meet and greets with Gekyume. These weren't casual fan interactions or free events at X memorial gatherings. These were paid meet and greets where fans would have to pay a significant amount of money, sometimes hundreds of dollars, for the opportunity to meet X's son, take a picture with him, and maybe exchange a few words. Let me just say this right now. The concept of charging fans money to meet a 6-year-old child is already questionable. This isn't a celebrity who chose to be in the public eye. This isn't an artist who's promoting their work. This is a little kid who happens to be the son of a famous person. He didn't ask for this, he didn't choose this life, and he's definitely not old enough to consent to being used as a commodity. But it gets worse when you actually see the videos and pictures from these meet and greets. There's footage circulating online that shows Gekyume looking visibly tired, annoyed, and uncomfortable. In one video, you can see him being picked up by stranger after stranger, each person wanting their moment with him, their picture, their interaction, and the kid just looks exhausted. In another video that went viral, someone asks Gekyume about his dad, and his response is heartbreaking. He says, "My dad is Batman. He tried to feed the Joker, so he died." Then he says, "I'm going to save my dad from the Joker because I'm Spider-Man right now." This is how a 6-year-old processes the death of a father he never met. He's creating a fantasy narrative where his dad is a superhero and he can somehow save him. It's actually really sad when you think about it. In other clips, you can see Gekyume saying things like, "I want to go home," or looking irritated when people touch him or pick him up. These aren't the reactions of a kid who's enjoying himself. These are the reactions of a child who's being overworked and wants to be anywhere else. One video that really struck me shows Gekyume at what appears to be a meet and greet, and he just looks completely drained. His eyes are tired, his body language is closed off, and you can tell he's just going through the motions because he has to, not because he wants to. And remember, this kid is only 6 years old. He should be playing with toys, watching cartoons, going to school, and living a normal childhood. Instead, he's being paraded around at events where strangers pay money to interact with him. And here's the thing. Even X's own fans, the people who love Gekyume and want to support X's legacy, are speaking out against this. If you go into the comments section of videos showing these meet and greets, you'll see comment after comment from fans saying this isn't right. People are saying things like, "This is sad, he's just a kid, let him live a normal life." X would not approve of this. He'd be pissed if he saw his son being used like this. The kid literally said he wants to go home. This is exploitation. I love X and I love Gekyume, but this ain't it. His mom is using him as a cash cow. He's 6 years old and already tired of this life. That's not fair to him. X helped me through my depression, but I would never pay to meet his son. That's weird and wrong. These are real comments from real fans, and they're not coming from a place of hate. They're coming from a place of genuine concern for this child's well-being. These fans understand that X would want his son to be protected, to have a childhood, to be happy, and what they're seeing doesn't align with that. Some fans have even pointed out specific things X said during his lifetime about family and children. X talked about wanting to be a good father, about wanting to break cycles of trauma, about wanting to create a better life for his future kids. He never said anything about wanting his son to be a public figure or a money-making opportunity. In fact, given how private X was about his relationship with Genesis, it seems like he would have wanted his son to have privacy and normalcy. There are also fans who have done the math on how much money these meet and greets are generating. If you're charging, let's say, $200 per person for a meet and greet, and you have 50 people show up, that's $10,000 for a single event. If you're doing multiple events, that adds up quickly. And all of that money is being made off the back of a 6-year-old child who, based on the videos we've seen, doesn't seem to want to be there. Now, let me step back and look at the bigger picture here, because this isn't just about Genesis and Gekyume. This is about a pattern we see in the entertainment industry where children of famous people get exploited for financial gain. We've seen it with Michael Jackson's kids, we've seen it with other deceased rappers' children, and we're seeing it now with X's son. The issue is that these children don't have a choice. They're too young to understand what's happening, too young to consent to being public figures, and too young to advocate for themselves. They rely on the adults in their lives to make decisions that are in their best interest. And when those adults prioritize money over the child's well-being, that's when we have a problem. I'm not saying Genesis is a bad mother. I don't know her personally, and I don't know what her situation is. Maybe she's struggling financially and feels like she has no other choice. Maybe she genuinely believes that these meet and greets are a way to honor X's legacy and connect fans with his son. Maybe there are factors we don't know about that complicate the situation. But what I am saying is that based on what we can see from the outside, this doesn't look good. When you have a 6-year-old child who's visibly tired and uncomfortable at events where people are paying money to meet him, that raises red flags. When fans who love X and want to support his legacy are saying, this isn't right, that should be a wake-up call. Gekyume didn't ask to be born into this situation. He didn't ask to be the son of a famous rapper. He didn't ask to have his father taken away before he was even born. And he definitely didn't ask to be turned into a commodity that people pay to interact with. Let's talk about what X would have wanted, because I think that's really important here. Based on everything we know about X, based on his interviews, his social media posts, and the things he said to friends and family, what would he think about this situation? In interviews, X talked about wanting to help people, wanting to make a positive impact, and wanting to break cycles of trauma and negativity. He talked about his own difficult childhood and how he wanted to create something better for his future family. He was excited about being a father because he saw it as an opportunity to give his son the love and stability he didn't always have growing up. X was also extremely protective of his privacy when it came to his personal life. He kept his relationship with Genesis private. He didn't post about her constantly on social media. He valued having a space that was separate from his public persona. So the idea that his son would be constantly in the public eye, being touched by strangers at paid events, seems completely contrary to how X operated. Multiple fans have commented saying things like X would be rolling in his grave if he saw this, or X would never let this happen to his son. And honestly, based on what we know about X, that seems accurate. He was protective, he valued privacy, and he wanted his son to represent something meaningful, not to be a money-making opportunity. Remember, X named his son Gekyume, which means a different state or next universe of thought. He wanted his son to represent something higher, something philosophical, something beyond the material world. Turning that child into a cash cow at meet and greets seems like the exact opposite of what that name was supposed to represent. Let's call this what it is. This is child exploitation. Now, that's a strong term and I don't use it lightly, but when you have a child who's being used to generate income, who's being put in situations where they're clearly uncomfortable, and who doesn't have the agency to say no, that fits the definition of exploitation. Child labor laws exist for a reason. In the entertainment industry, there are strict regulations about how many hours child actors can work, what kind of conditions they can be in, and how their earnings need to be protected. These laws exist because we as a society have recognized that children need to be protected from being overworked and exploited by adults, even by their own parents. Now, I'm not a lawyer, and I don't know if what's happening with Gekyume technically violates any child labor laws. These meet and greets might exist in a legal gray area, but just because something is legal doesn't mean it's ethical or right. The fact is, Gekyume is 6 years old. He should be in school, playing with friends, developing social skills, and just being a kid. Instead, he's being taken to events where he has to interact with dozens or hundreds of strangers, smile for pictures, and essentially perform emotional labor for people he doesn't know. That's not normal, and it's not healthy for a child's development. Child psychologists have long warned about the effects of early fame and exploitation on children. Kids who grow up in the public eye often struggle with identity issues, anxiety, depression, and difficulty forming genuine relationships. They don't get to have a normal childhood, and that can have lasting effects on their mental health and well-being. Gekyume is already at risk because of his unique situation. He's growing up without a father, he's the son of a controversial and famous figure, and he's constantly being compared to X and expected to somehow carry on his legacy. That's a lot of pressure for a 6-year-old. Adding the stress of public appearances and meet and greets on top of that seems like it's setting him up for serious issues down the line. Let's talk more specifically about the money, because I think it's important to understand the financial incentive behind these meet and greets. As I mentioned earlier, X's streaming numbers have naturally declined over the years. The posthumous albums have been released, and there's not much unreleased material left. The royalty checks are smaller than they used to be. But Gekyume himself has value as X's son. Fans want to feel connected to X's legacy, and meeting his son is a way to do that. So from a purely financial perspective, Genesis has figured out a way to monetize that connection. And honestly, I can't entirely blame her for recognizing that opportunity, especially if she's struggling financially. But here's the problem. That financial opportunity comes at the expense of a child's well-being. Yes, the money might be good. Yes, it might help pay bills and maintain a certain lifestyle. But at what cost? Is it worth it if Gekyume grows up resenting his father's legacy because it was used to exploit him? Is it worth it if he develops anxiety or other mental health issues from being constantly in the public eye? There's also the question of where this money is going. Is it being put into a trust fund for Gekyume's future? Is it being used for his education and well-being? Or is it being used to fund a lifestyle that Genesis got accustomed to when the royalty checks were bigger? We don't have answers to these questions because Genesis hasn't been transparent about the financial side of things. In California, there's a law called the Coogan Law that requires a portion of a child performer's earnings to be set aside in a trust that the child can access when they turn 18. This law was created after child actor Jackie Coogan discovered that his parents had spent all of his earnings from his successful film career. But I don't know if Florida, where Genesis and Gekyume live, has similar protections. And I don't know if these meet and greets would even fall under those laws. What I do know is that Gekyume is the one doing the work at these events. He's the one standing there for hours, interacting with strangers and generating the income. But he has no say in whether he does these events, no control over how the money is used, and no ability to advocate for himself. That power imbalance is inherently problematic. It's worth comparing this situation to how other celebrity children are handled, because there's a wide spectrum of approaches. Some celebrity parents keep their children completely out of the public eye. They don't post pictures of them on social media, they don't bring them to events, and they fiercely protect their privacy. Other celebrity parents are more open, sharing pictures and moments with their kids, but still maintaining boundaries and not exploiting them for financial gain. And then there are cases like Gekyume's where the child is actively being used as a source of income. This is less common, but it does happen, especially with children of deceased celebrities. The child becomes a way for people to feel connected to the celebrity they lost, and that connection has monetary value. One comparison that comes to mind is Michael Jackson's children. After Michael died, his kids were thrust into the spotlight to some degree, but his mother Catherine and his estate have generally tried to protect them and give them as normal a life as possible. Yes, they've made public appearances, and yes, they've been in the media, but they haven't been doing paid meet and greets or being actively exploited for income. Another comparison is Tupac's family. Tupac didn't have children, but his mother, Afeni Shakur, managed his estate after his death. She was protective of his legacy and made decisions about posthumous releases and merchandise carefully. She didn't try to create artificial ways to monetize his memory beyond what was already there in his music and art. The difference with Gekyume is that he's being actively used as a product. He's not just the son of a famous person who occasionally appears in public. He's being taken to events specifically so people can pay money to interact with him. That crosses a line that most celebrity families don't cross. This whole situation raises some serious ethical questions that I think are worth considering. First, at what age should a child be able to consent to being a public figure? Gekyume is 6. He's not old enough to understand the implications of these meet and greets or to make an informed decision about whether he wants to participate. So who gets to make that decision for him, and what criteria should they use? Second, where's the line between honoring a deceased parent's legacy and exploiting their child? It's one thing to share stories about X with Gekyume and to let him know about his father. It's another thing entirely to use him as a way to generate income from fans who miss X. Third, what responsibility do fans have in this situation? If fans stop paying for these meet and greets, they wouldn't happen. But fans want to feel connected to X's legacy, and meeting his son seems like a way to do that. Are fans complicit in the exploitation by participating even if they have good intentions? Fourth, what role should X's estate and family play in protecting Gekyume? X's mother Cleo is involved in managing X's legacy and estate. Does she have a responsibility to step in and say something about these meet and greets? Or is it not her place to interfere with how Genesis raises her son? These are complicated questions without easy answers, but I think they're worth asking because this situation isn't black and white. There are multiple stakeholders involved and everyone has different motivations and perspectives. So what needs to change? In my opinion, these meet and greets need to stop. Gekyume is too young to be doing this kind of work, and the videos clearly show that he's not enjoying it. He should be allowed to have a normal childhood, go to school, make friends, and just be a kid. If Genesis is struggling financially, there are other options. X's estate could potentially provide more support. She could get a regular job, she could find ways to generate income that don't involve exploiting her son. I understand that being a single mother is hard, and I understand that financial pressure is real, but that doesn't justify using a 6-year-old as a cash cow. There also needs to be more transparency about where the money from these meet and greets is going. If it's being put into a trust fund for Gekyume's future, that's one thing. If it's being used to fund a lifestyle, that's another. Fans who are paying for these meet and greets deserve to know how their money is being used, and Gekyume deserves to know that his childhood is being sacrificed for a good reason, if there even is one. X's family and estate also need to step up. If they're truly committed to honoring X's legacy and protecting his son, they need to have a conversation with Genesis about what's happening. They need to advocate for Gekyume's well-being and make sure he's being protected. And then finally, fans need to think critically about whether they should be participating in these meet and greets. I know it's tempting to want to meet X's son and feel connected to his legacy, but if doing so means contributing to a child's exploitation, is it really worth it? Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone's legacy is to protect their child, even if that means not getting the experience you want. Let's think about the long-term impact of what's happening here. Gekyume is 6 years old now, but he's going to grow up. He's going to become a teenager, then an adult. And when he does, he's going to look back on his childhood and form opinions about how he was treated. If he grows up feeling like he was exploited, like his childhood was stolen from him, like he was used as a tool to make money, that's going to affect his relationship with his mother, with his father's legacy, and with the fans who participated in these meet and greets. He might resent X's music and legacy because it was the reason he couldn't have a normal childhood. He might struggle with trust issues and difficulty forming genuine relationships because he grew up being treated as a commodity rather than a person. On the other hand, if things change now, if he's given the space to have a normal childhood and develop his own identity separate from being XXXtentacion's son, he has a much better chance of growing up healthy and well-adjusted. He can still learn about his father and honor his legacy, but on his own terms, when he's old enough to make those decisions for himself. The choices that are being made right now are going to shape the rest of Gekyume's life. That's not an exaggeration. Childhood experiences have lasting impacts on mental health, identity formation, and overall well-being. The adults in Gekyume's life have a responsibility to make decisions that prioritize his long-term well-being over short-term financial gain. So here's the bottom line. XXXtentacion's son Gekyume is being used as a cash cow through expensive meet and greets where he's clearly uncomfortable and overworked. The money from X's music royalties has slowed down over the years, and it appears that his mother Genesis has turned to exploiting their son as a way to generate income. The videos circulating online show a 6-year-old child who's tired, annoyed, and wants to go home. He's being picked up by strangers, touched by people he doesn't know, and forced to perform emotional labor at events where people pay hundreds of dollars to interact with him. This isn't normal, it's not healthy, and it's not what X would have wanted for his son. Even X's own fans, the people who love him and want to support his legacy, are speaking out against this. They're saying in the comments that X would be furious if he saw what was happening, that this is exploitation and that Gekyume deserves better. And they're right. X named his son Gekyume, which means a different state or next universe of thought. He wanted his son to represent something higher, something meaningful, something beyond the material world. But right now, Gekyume is being treated as exactly the opposite, a material commodity, a way to make money, a product to be sold to fans. This needs to stop. Gekyume deserves to have a childhood. He deserves to go to school, play with friends, and develop his own identity separate from being XXXtentacion's son. He deserves to learn about his father on his own terms, when he's old enough to understand and appreciate who X was. And he deserves to have adults in his life who prioritize his well-being over financial gain. The reason this situation is so messed up is because it takes advantage of a child who has no power to advocate for himself. Gekyume didn't choose to be born into this situation. He didn't choose to have a famous father. He didn't choose to have his father taken away before he was born. And he definitely didn't choose to be paraded around at meet and greets where strangers pay to interact with him. In my opinion, if you truly love XXXtentacion and want to honor his legacy, the best thing you can do is speak up for his son. Don't participate in these meet and greets. Don't support the exploitation of a 6-year-old child. Instead, advocate for Gekyume to have the childhood that X would have wanted him to have. One filled with love, privacy, normalcy, and the freedom to just be a kid. X helped millions of people through his music. He was there for his fans when they were going through depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts. He gave people hope and made them feel less alone. The best way to honor that legacy isn't to pay money to meet his son at a meet and greet. It's to protect that son and make sure he grows up healthy, happy, and free from exploitation. So that's the dark truth about how XXXtentacion's son is being used as a cash cow. It's a sad situation, it's an uncomfortable truth, and it's something that needs to change. Gekyume deserves better, X's legacy deserves better, and the fans who genuinely care deserve to see this child protected rather than exploited. Let me know in the comments what you think about this whole situation. Do you think these meet and greets are wrong, or do you see it differently? What do you think X would say if he was still here? And what do you think needs to happen to protect Gekyume going forward? I'd really appreciate hearing your perspectives on this. Thank you for watching. I hope this video gave you some insight into what's really going on behind the scenes. This has been Your Name, and I'll see you guys next time.